Hello, friends. We are back at episode 203 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. We are a little bit later than usual because, real life happened for both of us in different ways. Poor Mike here was the victim of my diatribe in the pre-show that we may or may not retread here. Well, we probably won't. But we're happy to be back this week with covering the latest highlights that have been shared in this week's Our Weekly issue. My name is Eric Nance, and again, I'm so happy you've joined us from wherever you are around the world. It is already the month of May. My goodness, almost halfway through the year. It does not seem real, but it is a happier time of year. I always feel like once we get out of the February doldrums that things start to pick up a little bit amidst all the chaos that can occur. But as always, I'm joined by my awesome co-host, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Eric. Yeah, a couple extra days for us this week before recording has helped me fully charge my batteries, at least.
Oh, be thankful that you didn't have any failures on that. So Mike here is referring to a recent car mishap I had the other night, which never an ideal time for those things. So yeah, folks, if you do drive cars regularly, check those battery levels. Sometimes things go haywire, and thank goodness for warranties. Okay, the good news is I don't need a car to do this show. I am right here in the humble confines of my recording environment here. And we get to talk about some really fun stuff in this week's Our Weekly issue. And as always, if you're new to the process, we always have a curator that takes the issue every week. We rotate among our team of curators. And this week, our curator is Sam Palmer. He also did a terrific job as always. And he also had tremendous help from our fellow Our Weekly team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your pull requests and other great suggestions. So we lead off with a very typical kind of tale in terms of building solutions, and you might be facing kind of a fork in the road, whether you're new to data science, new to software development, often trying to figure out what is the best tool for the job. And sometimes that tool is, in essence, the programming language itself. And our first highlight here is actually a recent new article from Nature, the Nature Journal, highly regarded in the world of science, authored by Jeffrey Perkel. And this is a very quick, very short article, but in a good way. It's very concise with a lot of interesting feedback from very esteemed colleagues in different industries on what they would say are key questions and answers to key questions for those that are new to the world of software development and coding in general, and how they can make the appropriate choice for what language they might use for their given task. So the article starts off with, just what is programming in a nutshell. And guess what? Like many things in this article, it'll kind of depend on what perspective you're bringing here. There are a lot of programming is at a lower level. Think of trying to build a solution that needs to be highly performant, cross operating system compliant, and like I said, very fit for performance. You're probably looking at one of the compiled languages where you write code. There is a compiler in the back end to translate that into the machine readable state that your computer needs to crunch through that processing. In the world of R, there are many packages that do include compiled code from C++. We are not, and of course, historically, languages like Fortran, which I saw in grad school, but also more recently, the Rust language has come, in a lot of focus as well. So when you're in that kind of stack of software development, these compiled languages are often what's turned to first to optimize these algorithms or these lower level utilities. But with that said, if you're coming in from data science, you're often used to you often need the ability to explore your data interactively, look at what kind of variables you have, do some interactive plots. And that's where you have the interpreted type of languages, where you're writing code and then there is a process that's often to the side of your code developer window where you can send that code and get feedback right away. And here you're looking at, of course, the R language, as well as Python, or MATLAB as various options depending on where you go for your scientific needs. And more recently, there are frameworks like Quarto that let you put multiple languages in one place if you want to hop between R, Python, JavaScript, Julia, in terms of running that report or that data analysis. So with that said, there's also obviously the world of web interfaces where, of course, Mike and I are huge fans of Shiny, available in both R and Python, as other ways that you might want to look at the language of choice in that domain. But then we get to, the other meat of the article about these various industry experts and how they are choosing the languages they're using and what is leading to those decisions. So we have from Eduardo Sacchetti, hopefully I'm saying that right. He is doing a lot of applied statistics research in the Netherlands, often looks at multiple languages and looking at the ecosystem around them, like how many packages are available. Are they in his specific domain of psychometrics? And that's where things like MATLAB have been very appropriate for him. But then others in the community, such as Janina Bellini-Sabini, who you've heard quite a bit in the world of rOpenSci as their community manager, along with other initiatives. She is a big fan of R because often everything she needs to do in R, there's a package for that. She jokes in the article, the only thing R doesn't do is make her breakfast or coffee in the morning. I'm sure there's going to be a package for that someday. What else is new? That will be a big hit whenever that hits. And so that's great advice too. Just what do you need to do, and does the ecosystem support it? Another key aspect is the type of data you're looking at, especially in the world of genomics, where not only is the data highly specialized, but the volume of it as well. It has been, known for a while that within the R ecosystem, the bioconductor suite of packages is very important in the world of bioinformatics research. And that's where having that available to you to import, say, those gene expression data files and to be able to have custom classes that are tailored to that type of data is really, really important. And in other situations is, again, the size of data. A bioinformatician named Titus Brown comments in this article that a lot of the hardships that can occur is when somebody's new to R, it's working fine for smaller data, but when they get to analysis that involves thousands of genomes and other genetic data, you might have to look at other languages that have packages ready to deal with large data. He references Python might have a broader array of tools to do that. I think R has come a long way in the world of big data too. You just got to know where to look. Sometimes it's not obvious to a new user, but being able to manage data in a file format, we're big fans of things like DuckDB. Hopefully things like that start to take a lot of foothold in the world of bioinformatics. And then lastly, another key consideration is when you're encountering issues, where can you find help? That's where, again, Janina has a great comment here about the R language having a welcoming community of everyone to support each other, as well as extensive documentation, both with the core R language as well as the packages that are available in many of these industry-specific domains. And with the advent of GitHub, many people are sharing packages in the open, so you have an open dialogue to file an issue. If you find an issue with a package, both R and Python are also very much not strangers to that area. And, in the advent of AI as well, that's going to be another consideration as a lot of newer students are newer to the language, are probably leveraging a large language model to help with some of that. And at least we are seeing that, with the right models that you can get some help with R for Python coding. But, we could go on for hours about how to best use AI responsibly, but I think in a pinch, it can definitely help you out, especially for some esoteric needs. So really great perspective from multiple industry experts in this field. And is there a winner in all this? Well, no, we're not going to pick a winner in this. This is about, in your specific domain, there may be an ecosystem around a language that's already ready for you to take advantage of to get your job done. And to really start where you see that most wide usage and, a great community around it. So, of course, we're big fans of R here. It literally does almost everything I need. Of course, I am venturing into other niche, languages or niche frameworks like JavaScript when needed. but R is still the engine that performs all my analysis needs at the moment. But it's great to see, if I was new to the game, just what kind of questions should I be asking if I'm looking to make a optimal decision.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It kicks off with a discussion about how Python has sort of overtaken JavaScript from, I think, some GitHub research that was done, and I'm sure that's in large part to everything going on with AI. But that's a pretty big deal, and I think there are probably also a lot of data scientists and data analysts out there that may not consciously always realize that they're developing software, right? Sometimes if we're just playing around in R, it can feel like magic, or Power Excel if you came from that world, right? And I really like Jeffrey's articulation of compiled versus non-compiled languages. That was really helpful for my own understanding, and a great articulation of sort of the long-standing debate over the usefulness of notebooks and struggles that they have with reproducibility. And the shout out to the Marimo project, which seems to be a great option. It sort of creates a dependency graph in the background, from what I understand. I haven't tried it myself yet. And when you change a value in one cell, the dependent cells will be updated accordingly. It kind of feels like, or sounds like, targets to me. I haven't tried it yet. We use Quarto, because it's easy to switch between R and Python within the same notebook tool. But if I was more exclusively on the Python side, I think it would be my tool of choice, it sounds like. And I also think sort of that big data discussion has pretty much been squashed, right, with the likes of DuckDB and the Parquet format. And now we have APIs from whatever tool we choose to be able to successfully leverage those technologies from R or Python. And Jeffrey, mentions and rounds out the article a couple different resources, including the Carpentries and the Data Science Learning Community. Those are two of my favorite resources. And maybe the last thing that I'll touch on is I agree with him that there's a lot of benefit, in my opinion, in choosing the tool that your colleagues are using. And Eric, I think you'd share this sentiment as well. But I also think there's value in really going deep in one particular tool and learning it really well, one particular programming language, and I think then it will become easier to adopt the next tool, as opposed to trying to learn two simultaneously. I did this with R, going really deep into R over multiple years before I really started to try to pick up Python, and I truly believe it helped me pick up Python a lot quicker than I would have otherwise. Though I'm no expert, I can get around pretty well in Python these days, and a lot of that stems from Googling Stack Overflow, ChatGPT, whatever you want to call it, saying, hey, I do this thing in R, how can I do this in Python, right? And knowing those keywords to ask are really what unlocks you to be able to get that answer, to be able to incorporate that functionality in that lesser comfortable programming language that you're trying to leverage and use. So I think that's been a really good strategy for me, and hopefully it's helpful for others. But this was a really interesting blog post. I thought it was sort of unique to our weekly highlights, this type of a discussion, and really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me as well. And one thing that really helps as you're, trying to go deep in these languages, it's always helpful when even though they can have fundamental differences in some bits and pieces of it. But I do share your experience there, that if I had started with a language that was deep rooted in, say, object oriented principles and other more traditional frameworks that, say, R and Python utilize, versus starting with SAS, it was really hard to translate what I learned with SAS being, quote unquote, technically my second language. I don't even count Java because it was a nightmare back then. But going from SAS to R was a massive jump, to say the least, because they were so different. So I think we're seeing, without me getting on my soapbox about the whole SAS stuff, we are seeing that whether R or Python, that's becoming what most people, especially in data science, are getting introduced to when they get to their respective coding classes. So I think the principles you learn there will set you up for success, even when you do have to venture off into some of the more niche side of programming. Obviously, we didn't hear about Julia much in this article, but I know that's getting a lot of momentum as well. But again, with it striking the balance of the open source paradigm, the object-oriented paradigm, I think with the resources out there, the key is seeing the community around it, knowing how to ask the questions that you have, hopefully having a mentor along the way or a user group you can talk to. Again, we're biased in the R ecosystem. We got the great data science learning community. Wonderful place to join if you're new to the language. It has so many people ready to help you out with the book clubs and other adventures. That's where you have to go kind of outside the confines of just what the language documentation has to offer to you. But the time is now to take advantage of those resources. And up next in our highlights, we did talk about some of the newer ways you can get help for information. And one of the ways that came from a code helper perspective a few years ago is when Microsoft introduced the Copilot functionality in Visual Studio Code and in GitHub in generally. And what can be nice is, using that to help develop, maybe that snippet that you need for that function you're trying to put in your Shiny app, for example. When GitHub Copilot came out in the very early days, and admittedly, I was kind of intrigued by it because I never really used a code completion thing before. I did try it out. It left a lot to be desired in the world of Shiny development, and I was kind of turned off after that. Now, this was about 2 years ago. I knew things were going to get better. I just didn't want to wait around that long, and I kind of gave up on it. Well, we have learned since then. There are some interesting advancements, not just in Copilot in general, but in the way that you can develop a Shiny app with Copilot. And so our next highlight comes from Peter Stroyenko, who is one of the leading AI engineers and thought leaders at Epsilon. And first, he had given a wonderful talk at the recent ShinyConf, which we invite you to check out the replays if you want to look at that after the fact. But his article in the Epsilon Post here is talking about now building more reliable Shiny code with GitHub Copilot, but also a new extension in the VS Code ecosystem from Posit. So what are we talking about here? Well, actually getting back to that ShinyConf that just concluded a week or 2 weeks ago, there was a keynote by Winston Chang that in about midway through had introduced some recent work that the Posit team has been doing by introducing a new tag in Copilot as an extension in VS Code, specifically the Shiny tag. So what does this actually mean in practice? Well, let's say you install the Shiny Visual Studio Code extension, which again is available in the VS Code extension marketplace. And if you have Copilot already wired up, you just fire up an interface for that chat in VS Code. And then when you're ready to ask it a Shiny specific question, you do the @Shiny tag before you put in your request. This was not around when I first started Copilot. There was no Shiny tag or even R tag for that matter. So I'm kind of trying to narrate what I want, and I would just get a whole bunch of junk out. But in this example here, he has where he puts the @Shiny tag, and he asks, create a simple app with a drop-down menu to select a variable from the empty car set and then a plot showing that variable's distribution. Now that @Shiny tag is doing a lot under the hood. What it's doing is it's basically behind the scenes really injecting the prompt that is often sent to these AIs with much more additional context around Shiny itself. Whereas if you don't have this @Shiny tag, it's just going to kind of go through its typical resources that the model's been trained on to do this. So he's got an interesting before and after situation here where he tries asking this question without the Shiny tag versus with it. And there is a stark difference where it is without the Shiny tag, it looks like a gobbledygook of API, custom API, JSON files, CSS files, YAML files, and other weird stuff under the hood. It ain't Shiny, folks. We can tell that much. Where, if you look at the example with the Shiny prompt, you get, at the end, after some questions that the prompt gives back to the user, in this case of which language, R or Python. Chooses R, and then, okay, where would you like the app to be put, and makes a subdirectory for it. And then sure enough, becomes a simple Shiny app already using BSLib under the hood. So that's great, taking advantage of that. And it's a streamlined app, but it got the job done apparently. So if you are developing Shiny and you're leveraging the Copilot, extension, you owe it to yourself to try this out, because I think you're going to get much better results in this than if you just don't have the Shiny tag to help you out with the prompt behind the scenes. Now, again, I have not tried it with the new Shiny tag. It's on my list to do. I want to make a note for those who may be wondering, wait a minute, Eric, why didn't you mention Positron? This is not available in Positron yet. I know that's in the works, so we may not see that until later this year. But if you're on VS Code already, yeah, maybe give it a shot and see if it can bootstrap an app for you in a seamless way. So again, caveats abound, but hey, there's progress to be made here.
Yeah, Eric, I really appreciate this work by the Posit team. I'm sure it's no small effort to convert all of the Shiny documentation to Markdown that can be injected into the user prompt. I'm assuming that's sort of the approach that they're taking, and it sounds like they did so on both the R Shiny side and the Shiny for Python side. So I'd be really interested to learn about how they went about doing that. I'm assuming in some sort of a programmatic approach, so that when the our Shiny package gets updated, or when the Shiny for Python package gets updated, that Shiny tag in the VS Code extension will reflect those updates for the sort of current best practices for those two packages. And this prompt stuffing approach is one that we use very often to try to pretend that the LLM was trained on a specific set of documentation or context that we want it to know about. With this approach, you're definitely going to get way better results than you would without doing any of this prompt stuffing. But behind the scenes, my understanding is that the LLM is sort of using a combination of the prompt that you provided, that context, as well as what it was trained on, and hopefully weighting much more heavily your prompt than the context that it was trained on. But I think you're still running probably a non-zero chance of it hallucinating on a particular question that you're going to ask. So like any of these AI solutions, don't take its output as pure gospel. Make sure that you have some sort of a workflow and approach where you're ensuring that either you have the documentation for Shiny pulled up on the other screen, and you're just leveraging, you're using that as a gut check and leveraging the LLM to try to get you to your final result faster, as sort of a co-pairing, pair programming guide, which I think is a fantastic way to do it. But yeah, I think this is, as I mentioned before, going to get you way better results than probably what you've been trying to do in terms of asking ChatGPT to write your Shiny apps for you.
I actually have I'm intrigued to try this out for a real case, I would say, where I'm about, without revealing too much here, I'm about to get an influx of requests from different statisticians at my company to help build some Shiny apps that may vary in the level of complexity. They may start small, they may end up getting bigger and whatnot. That's beside the point. I've been asked to, at least look at sketching something out to give a demo that may or may not, get the project, get greenlit for more robust development. I've been contemplating whether I try something like this to bootstrap the initial version of this. Now, putting this, your thoughts on this, Mike, do you think I should, if I was going to do this, ask it to start building an app that kind of follows what typically you and I prefer for our app structure, i.e. a Golem-powered app as a package? Or do you think that might just be a bit too much for it to do right away, and maybe I should stick with, a more traditional app layout, and then down the road I convert it to a Golem app? Do you think an LLM could handle something like that?
I don't know. It's a good question, and I think if you could, in a similar way to how Posit has converted the documentation or leveraged the documentation for Shiny for Python and R Shiny, maybe you could also stuff the context for the documentation for Golem or BSLib, right? I would imagine into that prompt as well. These context windows are getting bigger and bigger, so I think it's worth a try. But if you were to sort of do that approach without providing it any context around Gollum, I'd be interested to. I wouldn't have a lot of confidence that it's going to give you great results.
Yeah, I've learned that, when I'm building these initial prompts, I'm a very detailed oriented person with these things, whether it was back in the old days, if I had when I say old, it's only like 10 years ago, if I had a colleague that was instructed to help me with programming support for like this custom biomarker analysis, and I would give he or she the very detailed specs of here's the input data, here's the layout I'm looking for, just code this up and then let me review when you're ready. But I would always leave no stone unturned with like type of variables to look at, the type of output, these considerations, any derivations that they need to be careful on. I typically use that same approach for prompts, but I always wonder, am I being too detailed about it? So far, I haven't been, but I think, like you said, the context is really important. I can't expect in only a few sentences that this thing is going to know what to do, because what human would be able to do that either? So another perspective to keep in mind, I guess.
Yeah, no, I envision a world, I think everybody does, where someday, instead of using this approach to provide, additional context to the LLM about what you want it to know, to be able to have a better approach to fine tuning, I guess they call it, these LLM models, so that really it only has the knowledge, of the context that you want it to have.
Yep, and I've been seeing bits and pieces in these areas. You often see, these in within industries, some of these specific, bots or models that are being shared in Hugging Face or other areas. And yeah, I'm really intrigued to see where this ecosystem goes. And yeah, I'll give this a play. And in the end, would I ever just sign off with someone without reviewing it first? Oh, heck no. I'm not going to. If any of my colleagues are listening to this, don't worry. I'm not gonna throw something over the fence if I don't vet it first. So take that to heart, folks.
Well, if at Catchbrook we develop an AI agent for Shiny apps specifically, I promise we'll name it Eric.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
Well, and an amount of synergy here. Our last highlight is kind of going back to what we talked about at the very beginning for those that are maybe new to programming and informing what kind of choice they make for their language or programming language they're going to use to accomplish a certain task. Well, let's say you've already made that choice of you're going to use R to accomplish that task, and maybe you don't even know what that task is yet. You're just learning from the ground up here. Our last highlight here is an interesting perspective on what's been helpful for a recent undergraduate to learn R in the humanities area. So this blog post comes to us from Bruno Pone. He is now a data analytics consultant at the Data School in Deutschland. He is talking about what some of the things that he has encountered with applying, data science type principles to history and the humanities. So his first encounters with R itself was when he was in his master's studies at the Hertie School in Berlin in their statistics department. And there were a couple mandatory courses, and one of them talked about some of the statistical concepts that he became, interested in. Things like validity, selection bias, principles like regression to the mean. They kind of captured his interest and noticed that, hey, these could be applied to multiple industries, not just like statistics as a whole. So within that kind of area, he encountered his first R programming assignments. And it felt a little frustrating to him. It was totally new to him. Lots of function syntax that got a little frustrating, debugging errors, and was trying to figure out how to best proceed here. This is where, going back to what I said in the earlier part of the show, knowing where to get help and knowing any communities around that language can be extremely helpful. In his case here, Bruno discovered that there was, as we've heard in the community for years, access through his master's program to a platform called DataCamp. And for those that aren't aware, DataCamp this is definitely not free advertising. I'm just saying what they do. They just offer focused courses with video content and in-browser exercises all within their platform. You don't have to install anything on their system. Now, Eric's editorial comment here, you may want to think about different sources than that, but we'll leave it at there. But with that, there are plenty of services like DataCamp out there that if you're interested in some more interactive content, that can be a great place to jumpstart your education. So, like I said, there's a lot out there. Definitely let us know if you're interested in what those are. We're definitely happy to send you links about those other services. But once you get through that that little hump, if you will, in your development, now he gets to actually use some of the things he's been learning in this domain that he's looking at in policy analysis and really starting to leverage in those statistical concepts that you mentioned earlier within R to do visualizations, maybe do some ad hoc simulations to illustrate the impact of certain concepts. And then, of course, like all of us, we became the victim of the pandemic, which changed the world in a lot of ways, where we often were, confined to our various homes or other locations. And because of that, apparently, because of budget considerations, his institution stopped providing that DataCamp access. And that's where then he turned to platforms like Stack Overflow to help get questions and answers. And then also started reading more of the official documentation for functions and packages. As we know in the R ecosystem, there's varying levels of documentation for packages. Most of the time, the ones that are robustly developed will have great documentation they can draw upon, but there's more than that. He also turned to these great books that are specific to R and different ecosystems around R. He mentions O'Reilly Media, which of course has been a great publisher of various books like R for Data Science and the like. There are many others out there like CRC Press and others. He mentions the R for Data Science book. We literally, at the day job, had an open office hour, and some statistician was calling us and said, hey, I'm just picking up R again after many years. Where can I go to learn more? And both my colleague Will Landau and I pointed out R for Data Science is a great place to start. So we'll have a link to that in the show notes. That's also was the genesis of the data science learning community. So lots of great resources out there if you're new to the language to make you feel not so alone and learning about all this. And touching back on the last highlight, yes, in this day and age, AI, when used responsibly, can be another aid in that journey. But this is where we do, at least my 2 cents, I do stress getting a pretty solid foundation in your understanding first before you start vetting the AI solutions, because depending on which model you're running, depending on what kind of question you're asking through that prompt, you might get a solution that would have been great, say, 5 years ago, but maybe is missing some of the more modern approaches that maybe the Tidyverse is giving you. Or let's just be real. A real example might be, hey, I'm dealing with this large data. How do I deal with memory management? It may not pick up some of the newer advancements like DuckDB or Parquet that Mike mentioned just a few minutes ago. So just be careful when you're using those AI prompts to help you learn something, that you do build that foundation first through these more traditional resources that, again, if you're new to the language, I think can get you really far ahead of the curve, as well as you just reviewing other people's code. Let's face it, in the world of Shiny, I'm always reviewing what people like David Grandin and Mike, when you share an app online in the public, I'm always reviewing your stuff, many others that help inform my style, my learning. So I can't stress enough leveraging GitHub, looking at repos of packages or apps, or even just Tidy Tuesday analyses if someone shares their code. That's a great win in of itself. So in this day and age, not to be like that guy that says, get off my lawn, but we didn't have this stuff when I was learning R. So taking advantage of these resources, by hearing Bruno's perspective, was certainly insightful, and how he started from being both new to R and new to statistics into really loving the use of that language and getting some real interesting analyses completed. So again, great food for thought here, and I think a very relatable blog post for many people that are listening now.
Yeah, I agree. And, this blog post takes me back to some of my own journey learning R and some of the things that I wish I had known and some of the things that did help me or hurt me along the way. I really like the key takeaway around, visualizations being a really great way to see data come to life and to put meaning right towards the code that you're developing and actually sort of see the value firsthand there right in front of you, as well as having a goal or a project that you're trying to work on and using R as a tool to get you to that end goal, as opposed to just sort of trying to blanket learn a programming language without any specific particular use case that you're trying to tackle. This might sound silly, but one other thing that helped me when I was learning data science, maybe less specific to programming, but data science in general, podcasts. So I was a huge consumer of podcasts. So if you're trying to learn R, maybe R Weekly Highlights podcast or just rweekly.org, shameless plug right now, could be a great resource to be able to help you, just keep up with the conversations of everything that's going on and the verbiage and some of the acronyms that get used that you may see online in some of your research as you're trying to learn this that may help some of these concepts start to click a little bit better. But overall, I think a really great rundown. This was sort of nostalgic for me, taking me back to my journey as well, but some great, fantastic resources for folks who are trying to pick up R.
You give me the feels, man. That's why I started the R podcast back in the day, because A, no one else was doing it, and B, I had learned so much about Linux through podcasts. I thought, why is anybody doing this in data science and R in particular? So I do remember in the early days, there were some listeners out there who said, oh my goodness, this was such a massive help compared to just reading that online doc. So yeah, I think we can plug what we're doing here. I have heard people say it's been quite helpful, because in this day and age, so many ways to consume content. So when you're doing the dishes or you're mowing that lawn, you want to level up your R game, tune into the back catalog of R Weekly. We got a lot of things that we cover, both in our experiences, but also more importantly, highlights like this that share some great insights too. And like I said, the online resources in general, so much out there. Sometimes it can be overwhelming at first. That's why, again, I'm going to plug it one more time. But John Harmon, who runs the data science learning community, top-notch place to go to. Again, we'll have a link in the show notes. That is a wonderful way to collaborate with others, no matter where you are in that learning journey. So great post here by Bruno, and certainly I'll keep a lot of these things in mind as I hear from others that are also new to the language. And as we said, there is a lot going on in R Weekly, not just when we talk about these, selection of highlights. So we invite you to check out the full issue, which of course we link to every time in the episode show notes. And I do want to give a very quick shout out to an additional package that I found in our packages section that I think could have really been, it will be useful now. It would have been even more useful a few years ago. But there was a time in a day job situation where we had a project manager that wanted the status of all my issues on my GitHub repo for a big, large-scale project, because she wanted to feed that information into her, I guess, Gantt chart visualization thing to track a milestone forecasting and all that jazz. So I stitched together some custom code with the GitHub API and R using the GH package to kind of pull all this stuff down, do some massaging. Well, there's a new package that does that for you that just hit CRAN, and it's called IssueTrackeR, authored by Tanguy Berthomuli, probably butchered that name, but it does what it says, what you might expect on the tin. It's got some great functions to basically retrieve a project's open issue information, both the issues as well as milestones and other interesting metrics. You can save that to a local area, so that when you want to do processing on this data, you don't have to keep hitting the API to do it. You can have a cached version of this that you can refresh at any point. So, and then you can update this database when you need to, if you know there have been new issues filed or whatnot. But once you have that, there are also some convenience functions to filter the issues based on fields, maybe certain values or keywords, as well as some default sorting you can do of the issues based on, again, maybe milestones, other metrics. And I would have used the heck out of this back then. And frankly, I may use it now because guess what? As much as I use GitHub project boards for my issue management, I live in a Jira shop. So sometimes I might have to pipe some stuff from GitHub to Jira, and maybe I just use this as an intermediary. I don't know. Mike's already scowling at that, so I'm sorry for bringing up bad vibes there. But nonetheless, IssueTrackeR is definitely a package I'm going to be looking at.
No, sorry. I was just recently added to an external team that uses Jira, and sort of my first foray into using Jira, and I'm still getting adjusted to it. Let's put it that way. But that's a great call out. I'd be remiss not to call out Albert Rapp's Scalable Reporting with Quarto blog post that just dropped this past week. It's a use case that I think a ton of people have, and as always, Albert does an awesome job of walking us through that concept.
Yeah, I love using Quarto in many different ways here, and the possibilities that you can do once you use the parameterized, report functionality. There's just so much that's possible. And also check out his back catalog, if you will, on his site. He's been also talking about Quarto recently with types for doing optimal PDF reports and theming those up. So if you're in the world of static reports, you have our sympathies if you are, because, man, I love the HTML lifestyle. But if you are in that space, types is something I'm keeping an eye on for some really attractive PDF reports with that hint of CSS kind of styling you get in web reports. So definitely check those out.
Yes, types is awesome. It's super, super fast compared to LaTeX. And it's pretty much, I think, built into your install of Quarto. So if you have Quarto installed, then types is installed. No tiny tech.
Yeah. And that can be really important, especially those in the enterprise that get a hard enough time asking their IT admins, can I have tiny tech or can I have this LaTeX thing? You might get like, no. So anything that comes bundled in can be a big help there. But like I said, our weekly bundles up all sorts of great content here. We just mentioned a couple of additional finds, but you may have an additional find just by reading that issue. We'd love to hear about it too. And speaking of hearing about it, of course, our project largely depends on the community for help. And that's where if you find that great new resource, we are just a pull request away. Everything's on GitHub. It's all marked down all the time. Markdown, if you can't learn in 5 minutes, the author and knitter would give you $5 back in the day. Maybe not now, but at least he told me that 10 years ago. Nonetheless, you can file an issue or a pull request right from our GitHub page. It's linked in the top right corner of our weekly issue, our weekly site. And if you want to get in touch with us, there are multiple ways of doing that. We have a contact page in the episode show notes. If you want to send us feedback in the traditional way, I will get that in our weekly inbox, and I will be able to share that on the show if you're interested. Also, you can get in touch with us on the social medias out there. I am on Blue Sky, where I am at our podcast at bsky.social. And also, I am on Mastodon with at our podcast at podcastindex.social. Oh, those are hard to keep straight sometimes. And I'm also on LinkedIn. You search my name, and you'll find me there. And Mike, where can the listeners find you?
You can find me on Blue Sky these days at mike-thomas.bsky.social, or you can find me on LinkedIn if you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. You can see what I'm up to.
You bet. Always a great follow the hair on LinkedIn and the like. And I'm trying to get my head above water, so to speak. I have some recent day job projects. I got some more open source stuff I got to get back into, like some quote unquote conference package development for my upcoming talk at PositConf. I got to button some things up there. So, well, we're really happy you joined us for this episode 203 of our weekly highlights. And hopefully, unless real life gets in the way, we'll be back with another edition of our weekly highlights next week.